Let's see, Martin. Okay, Martin, you've unmuted yourself. Can we give a little audio test right now? Are you with us, brother?
I hope so. Am I?
Oh, yes, you are. Okay, perfect. I can see you perfectly. You got the map in the back. Wow, I feel like I'm on NBC right now. You have the perfect background right now. I love the background.
My lockdown study.
Exactly, exactly. Right on. Well, I'm just going to give a quick intro so people kind of know a little bit about who you are. So Martin Gurri is a former CIA analyst. He was also responsible. He wrote "The Revolt of the Public and the Crisis of Authority in the New Millennium," which we're gonna. I haven't read that book personally, but I think we're gonna riff on some of the ideas that he likely talked about in that. And he also was responsible. Has gotten credit for foreshadowing Brexit and the election of Trump. So the reason having Martin on here is because he wrote a response to, and we talked about this on the show last week, Martin. Mark Andreessen's post, "It's Time to Build," about how we need to, it's kind of a call to arms for how institutions, people on the left, people on the right, private enterprise, what they can do to prevent things like this from happening in the future, and also just make the world better generally. So I'm curious, what's your kind of take on that post, and then I'll have his essay rather, and then we'll have some questions after that. So welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks for having me here. I have a fairly simple take on the essay. I think Mark wanted to turn the public conversation around 180 degrees. I think we live essentially in a digital culture. I think we all exist under the shadow of the rant. I think
Right.
the basically default mode, the default rhetorical posture is yelling and criticizing in the most extreme possible way about almost everything. And I think Mark wanted to say, well, okay, what is it that you want? And can we build it? And I just wanted to support that in the strongest way. And I had my own take on that because I think before you get there, we need to change a few things.
Yeah, totally. So your take, your piece, and we're going to link to this, people in the show notes. I highly recommend you read it. It's a really, really great read. You're an excellent writer too. So it's a pleasure to just read just the way you write as well, which I really like. So you wrote the piece, your response to his essay was called "The Great Reset." What do you mean by the Great Reset?
Well, I mean, I think many of us are sitting around in this weird moment, this parenthesis, thinking we're just waiting to get back to normal life.
Right.
I have a strong suspicion there is no normal life to get back to. I mean, nobody can see the future, but my guess is that for many reasons. Number one, the contagion isn't going away anytime soon. Number two, the performance of the institutions has been so appalling to so many people that that's not going to go away anytime soon either. So as we go back, we're going to have reset society. We're basically the economy has been gutted. So there's three big factors that we're going to have to reset. And you can look at it as it's going to be probably, for some people, pretty brutal. People have lost their jobs. People are going to have to rebuild their lives and their careers. They have to reset that. But there are some opportunities in resetting correctly our institutions that have probably not served us right in this crisis.
Right on. So we talked about this a little bit on the show a few weeks ago. There's this concept of, you mentioned there's no going back to normal. I'm curious what you think about this notion. And one of the things we talked about on the show was, Fukin, every decade seems to have a huge altering event. Roaring 20s, 30s, Depression, 40s, World War II. Civil rights movement. You had AIDS in one of those Fukin decades, and in the early 2000s, you had the global financial crisis. 2013, the Snowden leaks. So it's almost like there's never a normal to go back to. There's always kind of a new fork in the road. And I'm curious, do you think this is different than those? Is it much bigger, or is this just along with the progression of how humanity works?
Well, if you were to read my book, you would learn that I don't make predictions. If you want to be
Right.
wrong, make a prediction.
Yes.
Okay?
Right
So
on.
at CIA, which I come from, that's
Right.
their business model, is making predictions. And of course, anything big, they've been wrong with. Okay.
Right.
So you're asking me to speculate. Of course, when I was your age, it was the 60s. Nothing big happening then, right? So I have a perspective of all those decades, and I think a lot of them have been serious crises that
Well,
defined
the '60s
a
was a civil
period.
rights movement, right?
I
Am I
was
get?
joking, of
Am I?
course.
Oh, okay. I thought you were serious. I was like,
I,
whoa,
I
wait,
don't
is that not?
remember because
I was like, I don't want to speak out of turn here because I wasn't alive back then. But okay, right, of course.
I was
Okay,
barely
thank you.
conscious, so maybe
Right.
for
Okay.
that
Good.
reason, it felt like nothing happened.
Right.
But yeah, no, a lot happened in the
Of course. Right.
'60s, and we have never been the same since. I think that was a definite climactic change. I think some of the things you mentioned, honestly, were media events that came and went and left very little trace behind. So
Right.
I doubt that would be the case with this particular crisis. This one seems to have staying power. You can't nuke the economy like we have
Right.
and then say, well, let's just go back to normal. It had no effect. It could be, I suppose, it'd be wonderful if within a year or two the economy were back to where it were. I wonder.
Right. So I want to share a quote from your piece here. It says, you said about one of the main foul ups. So first, the COVID-19 contagion spread much faster than the capacity of the big political and scientific institutions to react. These institutions are a legacy of the 20th century. They worship process and move with bureaucratic deliberation. Is it that these aspects of these institutions, is it that they did their style did serve us in the 20th century and that now they simply don't, or is it that now it's so is it that their strategy was effective before and now because of the way things are now the strategy is basically moot, or is it the fact that or is your take that the institutions have never really been that effective?
Well, it's a question of legitimacy.
Right.
When these institutions make drastic decisions such as go home, young man, lock your door and wash your hands. I mean, that's a very powerful thing for a political entity to be telling citizens of a free country.
Totally.
You are either going to react by saying, yes, of course, I know who's saying that and I trust you, or you're going to say, the hell, no.
Right.
And I think in the 20th century, the information environment was fairly dominated by these institutions, almost completely dominated, so that even when mistakes were made, either you could sacrifice an individual and not and save the system, or you could just sweep it under the carpet and say, well, no, this is the way it is. And you could keep the agenda under control. In the digital age, it's just not possible. It's just not possible. So we know every mistake to make. We know every death. We knew every death before the institutions seemed to know it, right? And we knew every stumble and every pratfall. We could see them before they even realized that they were pratfalling. So
Right.
I think there's a question of legitimacy, particularly important. It's true of all governments. Particularly important, of course, in a democratic government, where you need the consent of the governed, even if it's passive. And I think the difference between then and now is less the performance of the institutions, is the fact that we know much more. We see the sausage being made and it looks ugly.
Right, right. So it turns out the sausage was always ugly. We're now able to see it. Okay, I think in some ways that's almost a good thing, right? Because it's not
Yes.
that these things are. It's obviously good for more information to get out there, more for people to these things to be more transparent. But it's also that you're not saying that these institutions have, have completely imploded and are not operating the perfect way they were operating in the 1940s or 1950s. You're just saying that the truth is out.
There was no golden past.
Right.
None. And honestly, I tend to be very forgiving. People who are into the rant and saying, well, they should have done this and they should have known that. They were given really crude instruments to basically react to a very fast moving problem. And they didn't do well because part of the problem is they pretend that they know. These institutions have been shaped in an era, the 20th century, where you just stood in front of a big podium and said, well, this is what's all about and this
Right.
is what we're doing about it. Look very serious, wore a suit, and everything was taken care of. Well, they are still in that mood. They're still acting that way, but now we can tell that they're pratfalling. So it's the dichotomy between what they're telling us and the mood in which they're telling us, and the fact that we can tell they don't have a clue.
Right. Right. No, I think it's in some ways. I mean, it's kind of been mind blowing for me because my my the way I've been staying informed with this is not through official means. It's been through one of the ones that we've talked about on the show is a lot is Our World in Data, which compiles a lot of this data. And granted, a lot of this data is coming from the government from different governments, but they're putting it in, they're describing it in ways that people can understand, and they're putting it all in one place in a easy to use way, and they're open sourcing it too, so people can download and stuff like that. So that's been cool to see. I'm curious, do you think is that necessarily a good thing? I'm always of the mind that as much as power can be given to individuals, as much as individuals can take care of themselves and learn and share with each other, friends, family, community level, I'm of the mind that that's always necessarily a good thing. Do you think that there are there drawbacks to this kind of, and I think you call it the fifth wave? Are there kind of drawbacks to this that you see?
Well, I mean, I'm a fairly simplistic person when it comes to politics.
Right.
I'm a believer in liberal democracy the way we've had it all along. I don't nurse grievances. I don't have rage. I feel like I'm the last human being. I mean, I hide in my room and I pretend that everything is okay.
Right.
But I mean, I'm not really sure. That's a good question. I'm not really sure.
Okay. Yeah.
I would say, let me put it this way. I would say what is important is to restore the legitimacy of the institutions, whether you're never going to have perfect democracy. I mean, you're never going to have some digital way in which there's a problem presented, like should we lock in place or not? In America, 320 million people go to their internet, their laptops and go, yes, no, yes, no. That's not going to happen. And if it did, it would be horrible. Okay.
Right.
So you're always going to need elites. I think, unfortunately, the elites we happen to have now are not of a very high standard. And I think the public is exceedingly angry because of that. So I think the issue is, how do you reconcile the public to the institutions more than should you democratize everything or push decision making down to every individual? Right. And I think the way to do that is to get flat. I mean, we are in the digital age. We are living at the speed of light. All right. The government is like a great pyramid. It's just standing there. Right? And the people at the top have barely any idea that we're zipping around them at the speed of light. So we need to somehow sync up.
Right. So I want to, related to that point, I want to quote your piece again, the Great Reset, which I'll link to in the show notes. It says, "No reason exists why parties can't strive for the energy, participation, and shared interests of a healthy online community, say a combination of Wikipedia-style governance and subreddit-like openness." And my specific question there is, do you think are the parties right now? I think respect for the parties right now are. I'm not going to say maybe all-time low. I mean, we go through periods like this, but they're not very high. The respect for those parties is not very high. Do you think these parties are just in a period where they're going to be reforming, or do you think that they are? And again, I don't want to make you make a prediction right now, but do you think they're dead and there's going to be something else that grows out of them, or are they just going to reform and in 10 years we're still going to have Democrats and still going to have Republicans, or is there something bigger than that here?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the data, it's a weird thing because we were told that we live in this massively partisan moment.
Right.
Look at the surveys, the opinion surveys. Everybody says, I want a third party. And if you look at the trust in the political parties, it is at an all-time low.
Right.
So how you get partisanship out of that, I'm not really sure. I don't make predictions, and I won't make one now. But it is clear to me that among the very most catastrophic victims of this changed information environment are the political parties who were in trouble, by the way, even before then. I think. So basically, you had an institution with a pre-existing condition that got caught the digital virus, and whether they die or not, I mean, you look at our history, they seem to somehow endure. And you look at what's happening with the Democratic Party, where the grandees of that party basically put an arm around Joe Biden and are slowly walking him to the finish line. I think that is a pretty interesting example of an establishment getting its wish, which hasn't happened in quite a while. So they're there. I'm just saying, for our democracy to function in the way that it has with two political parties, the parties need not to be the way they were in the 20th century, which makes no sense, but more like what communities are today that are thriving and vibrant. And many of them are dysfunctional. You know what that's like, I'm sure. A public person like you, I mean, by the third comment, somebody uses the F word. By the 10th comment, somebody's threatening your life. I mean, the internet is crazy. It's a crazy place. You have to bear with that.
Right.
But you can also have governance like they have in Wikipedia, and you can keep it healthy.
Right.
And I think if I ran a political party, and I'm thankful I don't, I would strive for that.
I'm curious, and I've publicly, as you said, I'm a public person. I did publicly say when when all the, and feel free to not to answer. I know you're not necessarily a political person, if you will, but when I was looking at the Democratic field, I was thinking personally, who has the best chance of beating Donald Trump? I say, okay, I think Joe Biden does, even despite his cognitive abilities declining and some of the other issues with him. But I thought it was disheartening that to me that I think this is the only guy that can beat him. Do you think that's true, or do you think it should have been someone else of the field that was there? I'm not saying there should have been. You don't need to speculate on who else could have jumped in and maybe won, but of the field that was there, do you think there was someone else that you think would have had a better shot?
Yeah, I have no idea. I can tell you,
right.
The entire field, and I throw Trump into that basket.
Yeah.
It was pretty deplorable, as the saying goes.
Right.
But I mean, it doesn't really matter. I don't think you could put a cardboard cutout of Homer Simpson to run against Trump. The race is not going to be about the other guy. The race is going to be about what do you think about Donald Trump. So I think that unless you had, a candidate with Lincolnian qualities, and when was the last time that happened? Right. I think it's not going to be about the Democratic candidate. It's going to be about Trump. He is, until this one of the really strange things about this crisis pandemic is that it's the first time since he's come on to the public stage that he's been dwarfed by something. He was like this towering in terms of information.
Right.
You could see how the word Trump, or people talking about Trump, was this gigantic Mount Everest, and everybody else was down here in the plains.
Right.
And now with the pandemic, he is down here, and the pandemic is way up.
Wow, I never thought of. He was the headlines, and now it's been completely flipped. I hadn't thought about that. I love that.
He has dealt with every issue by making it about himself.
Right.
He could not do that. This is an existential threat.
Right.
People are worried about living and dying. Donald Trump, okay, you can think what you think about him, but I just don't want to die.
Right, totally. So I'm curious. You give a couple examples in your the Great Reset post where you say there have been slow payments to individuals through the CARES Act, through the stimulus package, and then slow FDA approvals until now. Some of this stuff is getting fast tracked. Are there any other specific things that you think, not just COVID-19 related, but that you look at the way our institutions operate, that you think need to be, you say flatten everything needs to speed up, but are there some like top 3 ones that you think this is what I want to point at specifically and say this is what's wrong?
No, there aren't any top 3 ones, but I mean, everything is relative. Everything in life is relative to expectations, okay? And what seems normal to you, a relatively young man, seems less normal to me, a relatively less young man, okay? Right. So, for example, I mean, I'm a happily married guy, but if I wanted to, I could go online and get myself a date tomorrow, okay? Online, right. At the speed of light. At the speed of light, I could get a date.
Right.
I could buy a car at the speed of light, okay? I can practically, I mean, we've all been living in our homes just with our computers making orders at Amazon, right?
Right.
Food arrives on the doorstep, okay? Then you want to get a passport. Well, it's 6 weeks, all right? It's 6 weeks. Then you want to get a building permit. Well, if you're in San Francisco, that could be 10 years,
right?
Right? It is like you suddenly have moved through a time hole, and you're back in the 20th century where everything crawls along and you're supposed to put up with it. And what's happened is your expectations have changed. That was always the case before, but there was no sense that it could be any different. Now, you can have practically, you move at the speed of light. Society is moving at the speed of light because it's online. All right. And government is moving along like a fairly battered, 1950s car that is just reaching its last gasp before it has to be replaced. So, I mean, it's expectations. And you can just go and pick any example of anything that you need to interact with the government with. I mean, uh, one of my sons and his family are here. Um, uh, they live in Brooklyn, so you can imagine. I'm in Virginia. I'm
Got
in
it.
Virginia, outside of Washington. So we've been very fortunate. The outbreaks here have been very mild. So they're here. His wife was pregnant, had a baby.
Right.
Okay. Well, to get a birth certificate, they won't accept a credit card. They won't accept that. You have to write a physical check,
Right.
or go get. I mean, I forget what the term was. Something that people don't use except I can't recall last time that was even used. This is to get a birth certificate. It's not like people aren't born every day. It has to be the 20th century mode of payment or none. Sorry, we
Right.
don't adjust. It's up to you to adjust. Come back to us in the 20th century. This is the way we like it.
Right. Right. Yeah, I never thought of it that way. That it's not necessarily that the government's going slower. It's that now I have things like Amazon, email.
Yeah.
I can Venmo someone, and all these things. But now and then I go to I go in to get a Fukin passport, and it's completely shoved in my face.
Where are you located?
I'm currently in Durham, North Carolina, but
Yeah.
I live in I'm kind of from Los Angeles and based there, but that's not where I'm quarantining. I'm quarantining in Durham. So
Yeah. I mean, the fact that you and I are seeing each other from Washington D.C. to Durham, I
right.
mean, that seems very normal to you. I'm still old enough that I think, good God,
Right.
it's happening instantaneously. So we're used to this. We're
Right.
used to it.
Right. It's
And we
absolutely
expect the
incredible.
government to shadow that.
Right. So we got a few more minutes here, and
Sure.
I know you were again. I don't want to force you into predictions. I'm curious on the prediction thing. I've actually published. I'm focusing more on the show right now. I'm not publishing as many predictions as I was. But the reason I was publishing predictions weren't necessarily to say I was right. It was to kind of track my worldview over time. I think a lot of the issues with pundits is they don't say falsifiable statements. So they'll speak in general terms. So you can never say you were wrong or you were right. Whereas I wonder what your take is. Do you wish people were? My opinion is, and I want you to respond to this, is that I wish people made more predictions, more falsifiable predictions, because then we could actually determine whether they were right or wrong instead of just kind of the hand wavy general statements that they make now. So I'm curious how you'd respond to that.
Well, I mean, if you can come up with a prediction that has a methodology that's repeatable, then okay, I'd be happy to hear that. When
Right.
it comes to human events, I'm here to tell you, I don't believe that's possible.
Right.
Right. So I think for issues like the pandemic, but like many, many other issues, including war or whatever, I think the idea that our elite class encourages, I mean, that, like I said, that was the CIA's business model, is we predicted the future. Well, if tomorrow looked like yesterday, then we got it, right? Because we
Right.
always were predicting yesterday.
Right.
Okay. And most of the time, tomorrow looks like yesterday. But when something huge happens, like 9/11,
Right.
when really the president would have been well served to know this was coming, we had no clue. Okay. So I don't really think it's possible to predict human behavior, human relationships, human affairs. I think you need institutions that adapt very
Right.
quickly,
Right.
that are quick on their feet, and who realize, oh, I was set up to do this mission, but now things have changed. I'm not here to make sure that nobody gets a bad cure. So no matter what, I'm going to put up every barrier I can to make sure that every possible bad cure is stopped. All right.
Right.
No. We need quick help now. People are willing to take some risk to get that faster cure. Okay. So we don't have those institutions. Our institutions are set up for the one model over here of, the 20th century. And so I think less than prediction, adaptability.
Right.
It's an evolution. It's a Darwinian environment. You can never predict. If you're a dinosaur, you're king of the world, then that meteor hits the ground and you're gone, right?
Right.
And some little rodent inherits the world. So
Right. Right on. Just to wrap up here, is there anything? Two more questions actually. Is there anything? People are saying that COVID-19 wasn't so much a black swan event as it was a gray rhino, kind of a slow moving thing that we knew was going to happen. Not new, but we thought there was a very likelihood, and Bill Gates has been talking about this for years, that there's a very likely chance that something like this was going to happen. Is there a slow rhino that you see today that you don't think is getting enough attention?
No, shortly, no.
Right. Right. What do you think climate change could potentially be one of those? I'm curious your thoughts on that.
I try not to talk about climate change. I don't know that much about it,
Right.
honestly. And it's almost like a religious subject with some people.
Sure.
So I don't challenge their beliefs in God or such, and I don't challenge their beliefs in global warming for or against. So
Right.
I don't see that. I mean, long view, and that's a really long view, okay? Because we long view. I don't think it's going to be a sudden thing. It tends not to be. It rarely does climate change catastrophically. But I don't even know enough to say that was for sure.
Right. Okay. Fair enough. Then I want to. I'm not gonna push there. The one thing I will say, I'm curious, just and feel free to just brush this off, but um, this notion, and we talked about this at the beginning of the show, which is this notion of positive feedback loops, where if you have the polar ice caps melting, as they as and there's other things like this going on as well, but as they recede, the water beneath them actually absorbs more energy and makes it even hotter, and it's kind of a positive feedback loop. So it becomes a speed up situation. It sounds like you're not worried about that potentially happening.
I just think, particularly in wealthy countries, I mean,
Right.
I think we can adapt. I'm a believer, and things change. The
Right.
world changed. The strange belief and that we ought to freeze in place the universe,
Yes.
which is prevalent in a lot of quarters today, and your generation seems particularly prone to it for some reason.
Right.
That's a strange one to me. Things are going to change. Bad things are going to happen. Good things are going to happen. You know, the piano's going to fall on your head. You just need to be swift on your feet
Right.
and adaptable. And I think in the case of global warming, I think that the wealthy countries will see it through. I'm pretty sure of that. The poor countries may be hard hit.
Right. Um, and I'm curious just to respond to that. Do you think if we had this discussion a year ago, and I was asking you about the potential for a virus to, a global pandemic to happen, do you think is this something where you say, yeah, we should probably have PPE on hand, we should have ventilators on hand, we should have systems in place that we can spin up quickly, and I think and correct me if I'm wrong, maybe your answer to that would be we just need institutions that can adapt extremely quickly. We don't necessarily need all these plans in place for specific things because we can't predict them. Is that kind of is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, I mean, for my own personal perspective, if I knew then what I know now,
Right.
then I would say yes. But that's the trick, isn't it?
Right.
And I think I would add, and yes, they need to be adaptable. But I would add another factor, which I think is really important and we haven't touched on yet, which is our elite class is still stuck in that rhetorical posture of I know, I'm
Right.
an expert. You should listen.
Right.
And I mean, you have a situation where the Surgeon General at one point says you should not
Wear
wear
masks.
masks. You're
Right.
taking them away from hospital workers. And then today you have a governor in Massachusetts that's making it mandatory by law to wear a mask.
Right.
So we need humility. I mean, that's fair. The ignorance of the human race far outstrips our knowledge.
Right.
If we are aware of that and we base our politics and our policy decisions by saying, well, this is the way we think it ought to be, but let's adapt later on down the road. If we're wrong, we'll backtrack.
Right.
I think there would be a lot more forgiveness of this elite class. I think as they come up there and they orate at us and say, well, you need to do 1, 2, 3. 3 days later, they're saying the opposite. And as you say, they're not publishing their predictions from way back when.
Right.
They just never said the thing before, right? They just completely transition from one thing to the opposite.
Right.
And we're supposed not to remember that they did it.
Right. There's an investor, Howard Marks of Oak Tree Capital, who puts out these memos, and one of the biggest things that he talks about is his ability to say, I don't know. No one knows. We don't know. We don't know where the market bottom is. We don't know what's going to happen. We have all these things that are happening right now. We don't have something to look back on in the past and be able to say this is what's going to happen because this happened before. There's nothing like that right now. So I really like people that are willing to just say I don't know, because that's more helpful than giving an incorrect assertion. On something. I want to end with one question. Is there anything? And I asked Cameron Smith this last. Is there anything in conventional media or in the zeitgeist or at the dinner table with your family, for example, that you think people are missing about what's happening right now? Is there something that you wish was getting more coverage?
I mean, not any specific thing, I think, and it's not just mainstream media. I think I tend to analyze media in terms of the information sphere,
Right.
which it's a huge environment, a huge ecology, and the digital and mass and phone kind of become interpenetrated, and they all talk about each other. Uh, the one complaint I have, if you want to call it that, is that
Right.
for such a supposedly fractured and diverse, I mean, all the saying is so fractured, it's so diverse, so many voices. It was like a single shriek of panic when this thing hit, right? I mean, you can track it. People have done it. It was like, I think January 21st, the first case in the United States of America. Until then, it was like a little murmur, right? And then
Right.
the entire information sphere, spiked. And, for example, we bombed people in Iraq. For example, a court in Russia said that Vladimir Putin could stay president until the year 2036. Events are happening.
Right.
I think we put an absolute value on this crisis, and I honestly think it helped stampede our officials into doing decisions almost themselves in a panic.
Right. Right. Well, Martin Gurri, everyone, thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate your analysis. I really appreciate what you're doing. He has a blog. It's called The Fifth Wave. I highly recommend you check it out. I look forward to being a reader. I wish you had a newsletter, though, to notify me when new posts come out. Do you have a means to do that?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I'll look it up.
Okay. Because I think I can subscribe. You can subscribe to it on WordPress. But anyway.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. But thank you so much for coming on, and thank you for your service in the CIA. Really appreciate that. And thank you for everything that you're doing now. Your service with your own blog. So we need more people like you. So thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and coming on, Martin. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Okay. Thank you. Have a great day.
Great.